What's up everyone, we're back at it again. My name is Brad and welcome back to my channel. Today what I want to do on this hot day is give you a week 10 update on what all of my ficuses look like post giving it the big chop. Without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off the week 10 update with my Ficus Elastica Burgundy. The Ficus Elastica Burgundy is looking great, but it's also been looking great for the past few weeks. I removed the stake because the tree was pretty much as vertical as I was really hoping to get it. I do think that the growth is going to continue to pretty much be fairly vertical. And I also think that these leaves, which again are absolutely beautiful in their dark emerald green color, I do think that they're going to continue to get larger. Now, this tree on the week 10 update is still pushing out a good amount of growth. There was a time where the growth started to slow, but I think that was probably due to the amount of heat that we were getting. Now, we're still getting a lot of heat. The highs have been in the high 90s, and even with that type of heat, the leaves still look absolutely beautiful. I did point out this damage here. That's just mechanical damage, and you know, I'm okay with that because I know that I did that myself. But all in all, the Ficus Elastica Burgundy is really performing well. Let's see, I have a new leaf that has started to unfurl right here. I have a new leaf that just popped out of its sheath. I have some swelling of the sheath occurring, so I know that that means that here in the next few days, I'm going to have even more leaves. Now, my goal here really is to make sure that this Ficus Elastica Burgundy puts on as much vertical growth as possible. So right now it is a little under shoulder height, and I'm hoping that it's going to put on at least another foot and a half of growth. I think that once the temperatures cool down slightly, and as I continue to give this plant fertilizer, it's going to just explode with growth. We got a lot of rain yesterday, about an inch, so I don't need to water this, and I'm okay with that. Without watering, that means I can't fertilize, but again, I'm okay with that because I have been fertilizing pretty regularly. So maybe next week, if the potting soil is reasonably dry, I'll go ahead and fertilize my Ficus Elastica Burgundy. Here is the Ficus Elastica Robusta. To be quite honest, I've been a bit disappointed with the growth progress of this Robusta for the past 2 weeks. Initially, it was just exploding with growth. So I had all of these varying growth points, and you can still see them, but the sheaths really haven't done any kind of swelling and really haven't produced any kind of growth in the past 2 weeks. And again, I'm pretty certain that that is due to heat stress. So when your plants get into this state of having an excessive amount of heat and hot, they do their best to really conserve their energy as much as possible, because not only are they losing moisture through the leaves, but they're also at the same time trying to balance out the moisture loss from the leaves with keeping itself well hydrated. When you reach this state of heat stress, your plant really isn't focusing on pushing out new growth. Instead, what it's doing is it's focusing on survival. And a great way to survive is to conserve as much energy as possible. This is a tricky balancing act because this plant is getting that bright, direct sunlight. And if I want it to grow more quickly, it potentially would if the temperatures weren't so hot. So I'm expecting that within the next maybe month, I'm going to get another big push of growth on this Ficus Elastica Robusta. But although it's disappointing me anyway with the growth pattern over the past 2 weeks, it still is beautiful, and I still do think that I'm going to get that extra foot, maybe 2 feet of height on this particular plant. Interestingly enough, my Ficus Elastica Taniki is still pushing out growth despite also having the same heat that my Ficus Elastica Robusta and my Ficus Elastica Burgundy are getting. Now, I know I have said this and I've preached this, but this plant will get those big leaves if you just give it time. If you compare my week 10 with my week 1, you'll see that the leaves are extremely small. And with those small leaves, you really couldn't appreciate the variegation that the Taniki would have. So let's see if I can find a smaller leaf. So if we take this leaf that's hidden back here, it's fairly small. But then when you compare it to some of the newer growth that's being pushed out, the newer growth is fairly large. But this is still not the maximum potential that the Taniki will have. These leaves will get just as big as the Robusta here. They're essentially in the exact same family. It's just a different look on your Ficus elasticas. So I still cannot wait for the leaves to get bigger. Now, I also mentioned that I'm getting new growth. So you can see that I have this leaf that's starting to burst out of its sheath. And then we have, oh, well, looks like we had some hungry deer because I have a leaf that's been eaten here and also a leaf that's been eaten here. Luckily, I shouldn't say luckily, but I'll deal with this because these leaves are far enough down at the base of the stem to where as these stems become larger and basically fill out, these leaves are basically going to drop off anyway because these branches are going to get thicker. So we're okay with that. And, you know, again, have some damage here that we'll deal with. Luckily for me, though, the buds have not been eaten, or I shouldn't say the buds, but the growth points, the apical growth points haven't been eaten. So I am going to continue to get that nice big push of growth. So here is my Ficus Elastica Taniki. If you like videos like this and want to continue to see more videos about houseplant tips and tricks, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. It's totally free and would mean a lot. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the week 10 update. Next up are the twins. That is the Ficus Audrey number 1 and the Ficus Audrey number 2. The Ficus Audrey number 1, it's still doing its thing. It's still pushing out growth. Finally got 2 new leaves. So also looks like I'm having a leaf that's forming underneath here. You notice that swelling, which is a great sign. And these leaves are just one of my favorites because visually looking at them, it's striking how dark green the leaves can get. But more interesting to me is just the velvety feel of these leaves. They kind of remind me of a lamb's ear, the plant, if you've ever grown those. Very, very, very velvety. And then moving over here to number 2, you can see that I have a leaf that just finished popping out. It's gonna get nice and large. It hasn't fully hardened off yet, which is why the green color is a little bit on the lighter shade compared to this darker shade here. And I'm also having some swelling. So that swelling is a great sign that I'm gonna continue to get more growth. And then when I swing over to this branch, you'll see that my branching is also going well as well. I mentioned this before that my goal is to hopefully have this particular Ficus Audrey catch up with the other Ficus Audrey. And I think that it's doing a fairly decent job. I did have this originally in a smaller pot because I was trying to show that keeping your plant in a smaller pot really isn't ideal. It basically constrains its growth. But since putting it in this newer pot and giving it basically the exact same conditions as my Ficus Audrey number 1, it's just absolutely exploded with growth. I'm hoping that, and I do believe that this will happen, that this stem thickens up by the end of this growing season because I just like those nice hefty stems and trunks because it makes your trees actually look like trees. These are the second set of twins, that is the Fiddle Leaf Figs. So Fiddle Leaf Fig, I think this one might be number 2 and this one might be number 1. So let's start off with Fiddle Leaf Fig number 1. So this is the one that I have pretty much been taking a picture of every single day to monitor its growth. And check this out. 2 new leaves. 2 new leaves finally. It's been stuck at a certain state for the past few weeks, and I'm finally getting new growth, which I'm absolutely thrilled with. And I also see some swelling here. You can actually see a green tip, and then you can see another, well, actually you can't see a green tip here, but that's okay. See if I can see any other green tips forming. No other green tips forming, but I do know, oh, look at that, another leaf. I do know that this thing is going to continue to explode. It's going to continue to just grow more vigorously and just continue to reward me with beautiful growth. Fiddle Leaf Figs, a classic. Now swinging over to Fiddle Leaf Fig number 2, it pretty much looks the same, aside from the fact that some of these leaves have hardened off. Now you can tell that these leaves have hardened off because of the fact that they have, or they're remaining nice and large, but they're also remaining nice and upright. Usually what happens is when you have leaves that haven't yet hardened off, you'll have these massive leaves, but they'll be quite flimsy, so they'll essentially flop. And that really isn't a good look, but this one looks very good. So let's see if we see any new growth coming. Check all, nope, nothing in there. See, check some of the stems, nothing in there. Okay, so we have, it doesn't look like we have any new growth forming yet on this Fiddle Leaf Fig, but you know, we'll keep monitoring it, and hopefully as the weather cools down some, we'll get some growth, because really all we're wanting now is we're just wanting that sunlight, but without temperatures in the high 90s, because that's really going to stress these plants out. I will say this though, that even though these plants are outside in very high temperatures and getting stressed, I still would rather have my plants outside getting that bright sunlight than keeping them inside where the sunlight isn't quite as intense, because the trade-off is still weighed towards keeping your plant outside if you want that nice vigorous growth and if you want a nice healthy trunk for your plant. Here is the Ficus Moonshine. Ficus Moonshine has actually done quite well. I mean, it's put on 3 leaves. It's working on its 4th leaf since I've gotten it, and that's probably an average of at least 1 leaf a week, week and a half, which is absolutely amazing. I am still a fan of this color pattern, and it looks like that with the amount of sunlight that the plant gets, it really doesn't, or with the amount of sunlight that I'm giving it right now, it really isn't impacting the variegation pattern. So by that I mean, if you sometimes give your plants too much sunlight, the variegation will go either one way or the other as far as producing solid leaves. For instance, if you give your plant too little light and your plant is a variegation of, let's say, green and pink, you might notice that all of the leaves that your plant is producing are going to be solidly green. Conversely, if you give your plant too much light, so say in the case of maybe like a Philodendron Brazil, you might notice that your plant leaves will be more of a neon color or a solid neon color. So I'm really impressed with what this Ficus Moonshine is doing, even with the bright sunlight that I'm giving it, because, you know, I mean, if you take this leaf right here, you'll see that the dark green is not nearly as prominent as the lower leaves, but at the same time, it still has a pattern that really shows off the uniqueness of this Ficus Moonshine. So 3 leaves so far. Looks like I'm about to get a 4th leaf. This is an absolutely beautiful plant, and I'm hoping that maybe I'll get another foot of growth out of this one as well before the end of the growing season. Now I have to say that this is probably my most remarkable plant in the sense of how quickly it has grown since chopping off basically all of the growth points, all of the offshoots. I basically just left it bare. Since doing this, it has just really rewarded me with a lot of growth. And the leaves, interestingly enough, got big fairly quickly. So this is the Ficus altisma yellow gem, and these plants are really great if you're looking for something that is extremely fast growing. as well as something that will offer you really cool, interesting, unique, vibrant color within your house. Obviously, this is outside now, but the reason why I'm keeping it outside is because I'm trying to really help it bounce back and recover from being neglected for a little bit. These leaves aren't velvety like the Ficus Audrey, but nonetheless, they're still absolutely gorgeous. Now I have a lot of branching, which is expected and which is awesome. And it really doesn't look like I've had any kind of damage to the leaves from deer eating them. But I do want to go down here and just point out that I do have some growth that is starting to form at the base of the tree. And sometimes you'll get this, especially when you have a plant that's getting just a lot of light. What I want to do though is I'm actually going to pluck these off, because I'm not interested in having a tree that is bushy. I want a tree that looks like a tree. So let's see, I'm gonna go probably about to this point here, and then we'll just continue to monitor it. I'm really hoping that these buds right here, as you can see, will continue to push out growth, or will start to push out growth. But this Ficus altisma is just absolutely amazing. And you can just see, again, the reason why I love trees that have all of these active branching points is because if you do have these leaves with all of these active branching points, you basically have a new leaf unfurling every single day. So absolutely beautiful, the Ficus altisma yellow gem. So the week 10 update is now in the books. I'm really happy for the most part with what all of my ficuses have done since giving it the big chop, but I am disappointed with how some of these plants have performed over the past week and a half. I do think that in about a month and a half, once the heat starts to cool down a little bit, then I'm gonna get that explosion of growth that I got at the beginning of the growing season. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. My name is Brad, and I'll see you next week when I give you the week 11 update of what all of my ficuses look like since giving them the big chop.